Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of The Russell Show. My name is Russell Brooks and this is part 4 and the conclusion of the Barry Eisler Spotlight. Now in a few moments I'm going to recite to you an excerpt from his latest bestseller, Inside Out. Now if you want to know a little bit more about Inside Out, all you have to do is check my previous blog post in which I wrote a review. Now in this part which I'm going to recite to you, it involves Special Black Ops soldier Ben Trevin and also Special Agent Paula Lanier of the FBI. Now, both of them are together following up on a lead on a murder investigation, which leads them to Costa Rica. Now, in the following excerpt, it involves them entering a bar where, naturally, they've met some resistance from a bouncer. So without further ado, here's an excerpt from Inside Out. They strolled over to Dreadlocks. The guy watched their approach and didn't get up. Ben wasn't impressed. If he'd been Dreadlocks and seen himself walking over, he'd damn sure be up on his feet before the threat even closed the distance. Paula said, "Hello there, do you speak English? Habla mejor español?" Dreadlocks looked at her and said in an American accent in English, "What do you want?" "Oh, thank you. You know, my Spanish is so rusty. We're here to see Mr. Taby." "Is he expecting you?" I don't believe so, no. But I'm sure he'll want to talk to us anyway. You see, we have some information about Harry McGlade." Dreadlocks looked at her for a moment longer, shifted his eyes to Ben, and shrugged. He got up, parted the curtain, and disappeared behind it. Ben heard a door open and close. A minute later, Dreadlocks appeared from behind the curtain. He stood closer to Ben and Paula than he needed to, crossed his massive arms across his chest, and said, "He's not here." Ben looked at him. "You had to go back there to figure that out?" "I guess I did. When's he coming back?" "Don't know. Maybe never. Main thing is, he's not here. Now you need to not be here. You understand?" "Oh, yes, of course we do," Paula started to say. "You know, it's just that—" Ben cut her off. "Actually, I don't. I can be a little slow about that kind of thing. Maybe you want to explain it to me a little bit more in detail." Ben could tell by a dozen tiny signals that this guy was not a fighter. Just someone who'd gotten used to intimidating people with his size and demeanor. Some guys like that, when they'd realize they treat a bad one, would find a lame way to back off and, save face. But Ben didn't see any of that kind of recognition in Dreadlock's eyes. Well, every would-be hard-ass fucks for the wrong guy eventually. Looked like Ben was going to be this one's first. Dreadlocks looked at Ben and frowned. Ben thought of something one of his instructors had once taught him, something he'd already known from innumerable street fights as a kid. But he liked his instructor's formulation anyways. When faced with violence, make sure you hit first, soon, early and often. Didn't look like Dreadlocks had received that particular memo. Well, it was never too late to learn. Dreadlocks uncrossed his arms and stepped in closer. Ben knew the stance was supposed to look confident, and he supposed it did. But it was extremely stupid because it left the whole guy's body open to attack. "I'm going to ask you." Ben didn't wait for the rest of the question. He threw a hand forward like a guy pitching a softball. There was a nice, satisfying impact as his palm connected with Dreadlock's package. Dreadlocks made an sound and doubled over, his eyes bulging. Ben spread his fingers, raked in everything in the neighborhood, and squeezed extremely hard. The sound Dreadlocks was making changed to a and his face turned as scarlet and stricken as the man was having a coronary. He wrapped his hands around Ben's wrists, but Ben didn't let up for a second. Ben looked around to make sure Dreadlocks didn't have plainclothes backup and that he hadn't drawn the attention of any of the uniformed security up front. He didn't see anyone. They were lucky the bar was relatively quiet at this hour. The security posture accordingly relaxed. "I'm sorry. What did you want to ask me?" Dreadlocks said, grimacing. "I'm sorry, I don't speak... But let me ask you something, and it'd be better if you answer in English, okay? Is Taby here?" He's here," Dreadlocks said, sounding like a human steam kettle. "Good, I thought so. Now, in a second, I'm going to let you go. You try asking me any more questions after that, I'm not going to be so easy on you, okay?" "Okay," Dreadlocks wheezed. Ben let go, and Dreadlocks dropped to his knees, clutching himself and making wretched noises. Ben stepped past him through the curtain. Paula caught up and said, "What the hell was that?" Ben glanced at her. "Just trying to break the cycle of violence, that's all." "You call that breaking the cycle of violence? Well, There's no more violence, is there? How are we going to get any cooperation after that? I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead yet. Ben swung open the door and stepped into a small rectangular room, only slightly better lit than the bar outside. Ben just stood behind him. A man was sitting in an enormous leather chair facing the door, leaning back, his legs up on a wooden desk, tooled-up cowboy boots crossed at the ankles. He had a head of shaggy gray hair and small, striking blue eyes set back deeply under a craggy, protruding brow. He didn't flinch when Ben and Paula walked in. Instead, he pulled a few leaves off a plug of chewing tobacco in a pouch and casually eased them up between his gums and cheeks. He closed the pouch and tossed it down to the desk. Then he slowly worked the wad into place with his tongue, watching them silently. Tavy, Ben thought. In his experience, any man who could be as relaxed as this one when two strangers barged into his office had a weapon within arm's reach. If the guy's hands went under the desk or into a drawer anywhere else, Ben was ready to upend the desk, and dump it on him. "Who the hell are you?" Tavy said after a moment in a deep Texas drawl. Ben looked at him. "Friends of Harry McGlade." "Harry McGlade don't have no friends." Ben realized that this was probably true. Acquaintances might be a better word. Tavy squinted. "All right, then. Harry McGlade's acquaintances. Now what the fuck you want?" Ben said, "Information." Tavy cocked his head and regarded them for a long moment, as though trying to figure out how two people this stupid could also draw a breath. "Well, sure, absolutely. Just ask anything you want. I'll tell you whatever I know." Paula said, "We were hoping if we can ask nicely, Mr. Tavy." Tavy spit a wad of tobacco juice in his cup. "The way you asked my bouncer?" Either Tavy was just coming to a logical conclusion, or he'd overheard the confrontation. Either way, it didn't matter. Ben said, "He started it." Paula looked at him disgustedly, like he was the world's biggest child. Ben looked back and shrugged. Tavy said, "Well, he's supposed to start it. You see, he's the bouncer." Paula was right. Paula was still looking at him, and Ben could almost see fumes coming out of her ears. He thought, all right. He glanced at Tavy. "Well, I regret the misunderstanding." Tavy smiled. "No, you don't regret it, but you will." Ben was about to kick the desk over and straighten the clown out, but Paula said, "We really do apologize for what happened. My name is Special Agent Paula Lanier, FBI. We're investigating a homicide, and we have reason to believe you may be a material witness." Ben saw Tavy's pupils dilate from a little adrenaline dump. Either the guy had reason to be generally antsy about the FBI, or he was specifically nervous about what Paula had asked him, or both. Tavy looked at Paula, then Ben, then back. He squirted tobacco juice into his cup. "I want to see some credentials." Paula reached into her purse, pulled out her ID, and put it on Tavy's desk. He put his feet down, picked it up, squinted at it wordlessly, and then handed it back. He looked at Ben. "How about you?" he said. He would have preferred to refuse, but he could tell from Tavy's demeanor that if the guy got the idea that he was faced with other legitimate law enforcement, he wasn't going to tell them shit. He hadn't said anything about examining Paula's ID. It was a good bet that he'd read and return Ben silently as well. Ben handed him the damn Fromkin ID. Paula glanced at it as it changed hands. Whatever she saw, she said nothing. The main thing now was that Tavy feel a little more cooperation would be in his interests. The bet paid off. Tavy looked, squinted, and handed it back. Ben slipped the ID into his pocket and said, "Now, what were you saying about how we might regret something?" There were footsteps behind them. Ben spun around, ready to draw down. It was Dreadlocks, still somewhat hunched over, and two other guys in black t-shirts. "It's fine, Bobby," Tavy said. "We're all fine. All of you go on back down to the bar now, you hear?" Dreadlocks Bobby gave Ben what he must have thought was a menacing look and turned to go. Ben said, "Oh!" Dreadlocks' face reddened. "Motherfucker," he growled. "Thanks, Bobby," Tavy said. "We'll talk later." Dreadlocks limped out, the other two security guys just behind him. Tavy said, "Okay, apology accepted. Now what's this about a murder?" Ben was about to respond, but Paula beat him to it. Our acquaintance, Mr. McGlade, explained to us how he retained you to follow the subject of an investigation of his, one Daniel Larison, whom McGlade had traced to San Jose. Mr. McGlade informs us that Mr. Larison murdered an associate of yours. We'd like to learn more about that. Tavy was silent for a long moment. He drummed his fingers along the desk. Ben watched his hands. He looked at Ben, then back to Paula. Mr. McGlade told you that, did he? Paula said, yes, he did. Tibby squirted a brown stream into his cup. Well, what can I tell you about McGlade? He's a grade-A scumbag. If I had time, I'd get on a plane, fly out to Orlando, and personally put a boot straight up his ass. I can't say we found his company particularly pleasant either, Paula said. No, I'd be very grateful for anything you can tell us about Larison. Our investigation doesn't otherwise concern you, your bar, or any of your affairs. Even if we were to see something untoward here, narcotics, for example, or any other illicit thing, we'd be too focused on the information you give us to even care, or to remember. Tibby leaned back in his chair and crossed his ankles on his desk again. Like you guys have any jurisdiction here in Jacko anyways. Please. Paula smiled, and Ben wondered if Tibby, who would seem to have good instincts, would recognize just how dangerous her smile could be. Oh, Mr. Tavy, she said in her most honeyed voice. I hope a smart man like you would know better than that. There's jurisdiction, and then there's jurisdiction. It's the second kind that can really bite you in the ass, especially if you give someone a reason. Tavy looked at her for a long moment. Ben could tell the man was tough, but he could also tell he was smart. He knew what Tavy would do. Well, Tavy said with a grudging smile, I don't see any reason why we can't have a decent conversation. Just about some hypotheticals. Nothing that really happened. And off the record, of course. Paula returned his smile. That's all we're asking. Tibby scrunched up his face, worked his chew from around inside his cheek, and spat it into his cup. He got up and sauntered over to the bureau. What's your poison? Ben thought it extremely unlikely the man would try to drop 2 FBI agents in his own bar. Still, he watched him closely, ready to draw and use the desk for cover if Tavy did anything the least bit froggy. We're on duty, Paula said, but thank you. Suit yourself, Tavy said. He pulled the stopper out of a decanter and poured a large measure of what looked like whiskey into a glass. How about you, tough guy? He said, looking over his shoulder. You look like a whiskey guy to me. Nah, milk's more my speed. Tavy chuckled. He picked up his glass, took a swallow, and let out a long breath. He turned his back to the bureau and leaned against it, looking Ben up and down. The FBI must have been short on decent wise-asses when they hired you. Yes, sir, Paula said, shooting eye daggers at Ben. That's about right. Now those hypotheticals you were going to tell us about. Tavy took another swallow. What's the worst thing that happens if you get made on surveillance? Ben looked at him. It depends on the target. Tibby's eyes narrowed. Target, huh? Not subject? Ben thought, shit, Paula said. My associate here did some other things before joining the bureau. I'm sure you might have noticed that. My associate, Ben thought. She didn't know what name Tavy had seen on the ID, so she didn't use one. She was good. At the moment, he had to admit better than he was at the moment. Did he now? Tavy said. Well, Ben said, what's the worst thing? Tavy rolled the glass between his palms. In my experience, you embarrassed. Maybe you blow the case. Ben waited. So you understand that that's all we were expecting. That was the limit of our downside. McGlade told us about this guy was surveillance conscious. Sure. But that's like saying someone with the fucking Ebola virus is feeling a little bit under the weather. It don't exactly prepare you for what you're about to face. He took another swallow of whiskey, and Ben was fascinated to see the way real tension was creeping into his expression and posture. The man didn't like what he was remembering. We followed Larison from the airport, see? He took the bus, and we used a 4-person tag team. All we needed to do was track him to his mistress's place, if there was a mistress, and get a photo, email it to McGlade, back at the bar by midnight. Easy money for an evening's work. Well, let me tell you about our easy money. We've been rotating the point to keep Larison from getting a fix on anyone. My guy Carlos went first and rotated out when Larison changed buses in San Jose. By the time we tracked Larison to Barry Eisler, a suburb on the east side of the downtown, Carlos was on point for the third time. We'd been careful as hell, but Larison must have made Carlos anyway. I had visual contact with Carlos. He had the eye on Larison. All of a sudden, Carlos stops under a street light, looks confused, looks left, looks right. Now I'm thinking, fuck, Larison slipped him. We blew it. He took a swallow of whiskey and let out a long breath. And just as I'm thinking that, Larison appears out of the dark like a fucking apparition. I know how this sounds, and I don't care. I'm telling you, the man was gone, and then he was there. He did something. It looked like just touched Carlos slightly from behind, and then he was gone again like fucking vapor. Carlos started staggering around, clutching his neck. There was a slurping sound, and I ran over. Fucking blood like I've never seen. And I promise you, I've seen blood. Blood is gazing off Carlos's neck, just shooting out all around his hands and between his fingers. Larison must have punched a knife or something like, you got that? Something sharp as a razor. Opened Carlos up like a fucking beer can. He knew exactly where to put that cut. Jesus. I'm telling you, I never saw anything like that. Carlos went down and bled out in 10 seconds. I had blood inside my shoes. My socks were soaked from standing in it. He took another swallow of whiskey and shuddered. Hypothetically, that is. Ben had no doubt Tavy was telling the truth. First, because unless he had natural Oscar potential as an actor, he couldn't have feigned what Ben had just seen. Second, because Ben understood Larison. He knew the training, the reflexes, the mindset. Ben said, why didn't you go after him? What? That night? I told you. We might as well have been chasing the humidity under the streetlight. No other time? You traced him to Barry Eisler, and you're local. You could have found him. Tavy's expression was grim. Maybe one of us did. Ben and Paula said nothing. Tavy finished what was in his glass and refilled it. Yeah, Carlos had a brother. They were both part of my crew. The brother's name was Juan. Juan was a tough little bastard, and he worshipped that big brother of his. He was out of his mind from what Larison did. It was all. Let's get that motherfucker this, and let's get him that, and let's get him this, and let's do that to him that. I told him we need to keep cool, keep our heads cool, and cut our losses. That this guy was way out of our league, and we got an off lightly. See, I've been around long enough, and I can make that kind of call. But Juan was young and stupid. And it was his brother? Ben said, thinking of Alex. Yeah, it was his brother, all right. Hard to let that go. Well, stormed off, telling us how we were a bunch of pussies and cowards and we can all go to hell. Which I'm sure we all will eventually. It's just that Juan found a way to get himself there first. What happened? Ben asked. I don't know what happened. My guess is Juan went back to Barry Eisler looking for Larison. Somehow found him. Maybe got lucky, if you want to call it that. Found his body in a sewer in Los Yoses, another little suburb adjacent to Barry Eisler. Skull crushed from behind. Larison must have come up behind him just like he did with Carlos. Only difference was Juan's wallet was missing, so the police wrote it off as a robbery. Juan wasn't exactly an honest citizen, by the way, so it's not like the police knocked themselves out trying to figure out what happened to him. His wallet was gone, Ben said, imagining Larison. Yeah, I figured it was Larison's way of making it look like a robbery instead of an execution. Less interesting that way to the gendarmerie. You say the brothers were named Carlos and Juan? Paula said. That's right. Carlos and Juan Cole. The deaths occurred in Barrio Dent and Los Yoses? Yep, like I said. Close to each other? I'd say about 3 to 5 miles apart. Can you tell us exactly, precisely? Well, he did Carlos across the street from a restaurant called La Trattoria in Barrio Dent, just north of the Citibank on the Central Avenue, leading from San Jose to the suburbs. You can't miss it. There's only a single street light. The rest of the street is in dark. That's where Larison chose it. Ben knew that's why Larison chose it. He spotted the tail and then led them into an ambush. And Juan? Paula said. Juan, that was around the corner from a restaurant called Spoon in Los Yoses. 1 block southeast from the restaurant. The corner with the sewer. Any other contact with Larison after that? She asked. Are you kidding me? Let me tell you something. I think you can surmise that I don't have a lot of rules in my life, but I've got one. You don't fuck with the angel of death. Angel of death, Ben said. Tibby looked at him, squinting slightly as though trying to decide something. Now don't you pretend like you don't know what I'm talking about too, amigo. I can tell you that. He took a swallow of whiskey, then looked into the glass. You know, I served in Vietnam, and I've known some pretty tough customers along the way. But I've known only 3 men who I'd call death personified. One was a guy named Jake, and he long dead. Another one by the name of Jasper is supposed to be in business for himself now, and believe you me, you don't want to be the subject of that business. The last was a part Japanese guy named Rain. No one knows what happened to him in the end. Larison is in that league. He killed Carlos about as casually as I spit tobacco. And Juan, too? Oh yeah, snuffed him out and then evaporated like some evil fucking mist. Like I told Juan before he went and threw his life away, we were lucky. With a guy like Larison, it could have been a lot worse. Paula said, so you never saw him again? Nope. And I sure as hell haven't been looking. She said, you don't know what he was doing here? I don't know if he was on holiday or if he had a mistress or if he wanted to go hiking in the fucking rainforest. I don't know how long he was here or whether he'd been back. I don't know anything more than what I just told you. And I don't really want to either. They were all quiet for a moment. Ben said, I want to know something. What you want to know, son? Why'd you tell us all this? Tibby glanced at Paula. That's easy, son. Because your partner asked so nicely, remember? Ben shook his head. I don't think so. Tibby took a swallow of whiskey. I told you. I don't want to cross paths with Larison again. That don't mean that I want him to live happily ever after either, you see? So whatever you plan to do with him, I figure now it's your risk and maybe my reward. That's a division of labor I can live with. Paula frowned. What do you mean, whatever we're planning to do with him? You gotta be kidding, young lady. What I mean is, if you're FBI, then I'm Doris fucking Day. He nodded at Paula. You maybe? Yeah, pretty young lady. Yeah, maybe you's FBI. Then he looked at Ben. But you? Hell no. Yeah, Ben said. What am I? I don't know exactly, son. But I'll tell you what you look like. You look like him. That I can tell you. So there you have it, everyone. For more information on Barry Eisler, check him out at his website, barryeisler.com. Thank you for joining this evening. Be safe and stay healthy. Good night.